Hello, Simone. I'm excited to be here with you today. Today, we are going to be talking about a theory about fertility rates that come out from Cremieux, friend of the show. Don't know if he's ever been on. We should ask him. Nice guy. But anyway, he has done a new theory where he tries to understand why fertility rates fall faster in some countries than other countries, i.e., what is protective of fertility rates. And the gist of the argument is that these countries modernized later, and that caused them to maintain more of their ancestral culture, specifically the misogyny and gender roles, which is not properly updated for the new context and leads to a crash in fertility rates. And I thought that the theory was really interesting. So let's go over it piece by piece, because I think he might be onto something here. But any thoughts before I start?
Let's dive in. Let's do it.
All right, let's get a graph on screen here. Gotta enhance.
Yeah, give us the visual. And the premise that Cremieux sets is, what differentiates the countries in orange from the countries in blue? Why did the orange countries plunge into ultra low fertility while the blue ones have maintained themselves better?
So let's talk about the two country groups. Orange includes Korea, Spain, and Italy, while blue includes the United States, France, and the United Kingdom.
And Cremieux groups them into two sets. He says the countries in the first set are Group 1 nations. In the second set, they are Group 2 nations. Notice anything about their growth rates? One thing is that they've all grown to similar enough levels. Another is the acceleration of the pace of growth. So in the second tweet, he shares two additional graphs showing different trajectories of growth and different fertility rates. Okay. In Group 1, nations started off a bit richer and they grew at a more stable pace. In Group 2, the nations started off poorer, but they caught up to Group 1 by growing faster in the latter half of the 20th century. Their fertility rate trajectories followed suit.
And so what you see here is a really interesting thing in Group 1 countries, where we've talked about it in other videos, but around the 1930s, there was a huge fertility crash that a lot of these Group 1 countries recovered from. This was mostly due to medical technology, although housing in the war played a role as well. And you can look at our video on, the baby boom to get more information on this. But the gist being is that if you take the baby boom as an anomaly and you sort of try to draw a through line through these, it looks fairly stable. Whereas these other countries start to crash really dramatically and pretty quickly. And what's interesting is most of the crash in these other countries' fertility rates happens between 1920 and I'd say 1980. So before our modern time. And that's where they're dropping for much higher initial fertility rates. So if you look at it, like sort of the mean fertility rate at the beginning of this period in 1920 for the Group 2, all of these countries where they started with a much higher mean fertility, let's say around 4 or maybe even 4.5, whereas the other group started with a mean fertility of 3 to 3.5. So it's almost as if the higher fertility you start with, the lower your fertility goes over time.
Yeah, and Cremieux has a theory around this. Cremieux writes, all societies used to be pretty sexist. They used to repress women in various ways, and that was just that for all of human history. But as societies have developed, one of the major changes has been that women's status has quickly moved up to the levels that have only once been seen by men. With slow, continuous growth, these norms changed and women's acceptance was taken up gradually without much need for pushing. But with rapid growth, the picture is far different. The norms have changed more slowly than the markets, and that may have been disastrous. You can see plenty of signs of this everywhere. For example, in the Group 1 nations that experience slow and steady growth, men and women tend to have more similar household labor distributions. He then shares a graph of time use and fertility among the 12 Group 1 and Group 2 nations, and there is somewhat of a negative correlation between total fertility rate and female minus male daily hours of unpaid household labor. He continues, similarly, in the case of distributions in the home is incidentally related to fertility among this group of developed countries. He shows another graph with negative correlation between time and fertility among 20 nations. He writes, I'm aware there are issues with treating this as if it's causal, but The point here is less about the particular example of household time use and more about how norms change over time with slow versus rapid growth. Take South Korea as an example. In South Korea, men's attitudes towards women are still pretty unrefined. A potential result, enormous sex differences in getting along in politics. These gulfs are opening up the world over, but South Korea is the most extreme example. Here he shares a Financial Times graph showing the ideology gap opening up between young men and women in countries across the world, with South Korea being the first country shown. And just over time, especially from 2015 to 2020, the gap is just like they're just becoming different species. Whereas in the US, the gap is violent, but not that insane. In Germany, it's a little bit less bad. And in the UK, it's also, I mean, they're all getting worse. And this resonates with me. I mean, I could see a lot of the tension there making sense.
I actually think Grok came up with a better answer, but I do like this answer. It's definitely something that is contributing to the fertility collapse that we're seeing in Italy and Spain, is the idea that not Italy and Spain, South Korea. I don't know why I said that, but it is likely the same thing, is that men are staying much more misogynistic in their attitudes and expectations of their wives than men are in the United States. And if you get female liberation in terms of the workforce, with all the misogynistic attitudes now, marriage becomes an incredibly raw deal for women, just in terms of hedonism. I'm not saying in terms of like genetics or whatever, but if you are expected to handle the kids, handle the house, and handle a career that's equivalent to your husband's career, and he just does whatever, like takes the status, bosses you around, like
what?
Why would you want that, right? And then a lot of men feel like, well, you should give us, like, we do need to maintain some degree of our historic cultures. So I understand why they're pushing back, and they think a lot of women have gone too far in their accusations around men, blah, 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 blah. I mean, if you look at the level of misogyny and misandry in Korea, it is at a completely different level than what you see in the United States or something like that. Like, these two genders are almost two separated political classes now. And that's definitely more in Italy. I grew up partially in Italy. I lived there for a year when I was a kid. And one of the things I distinctly remember is the constant catcalling.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, and this was true when I was growing up there. And I remember this, being an American from Texas, being in Italy. And in Texas, I don't remember ever hearing catcalling.
Golly. Okay.
You just wouldn't do it. Like, you get beaten up or something, But in Italy, no, it's considered very normal for guys to be, really. And people who don't understand why catcalling is bad, like, you are intentionally harassing in a way that is meant to be derogatory of their status relative to your status, a woman. A lot of people think that this is like, I don't know, that there might be some women who have like a weird fetish for it. They're not even a weird fetish. I'd actually say it's probably a normal fetish to like being publicly humiliated by men saying you're attractive. But I don't think that it is something that you're going to see a lot of in countries where women are seen as, tough or deserving of their own, like, rights. Now, when I put this into, any thoughts before we go to what Grok has to say?
No, you have me so curious about what Grok is going to say. I can't say no.
All right. So what I put into Grok to sort of test it. So if you look at the countries that he includes in the two groups, I decided to only include a few of the countries that he includes in the two groups to see if Grok's findings hold true for the other groups that are in the two groups. So the full two groups that he used was Denmark, France, Germany, Sweden, UK, US. The second group was Greece, Italy, Japan, Korea, Portugal, and Spain. And so I decided, let's just do two. Okay. So what's the difference between South Korea, Spain, and Italy, and the US, France, and the UK? All right. Culturally speaking.
Sure. What?
It says the most striking thing would be respect for elders, and this is definitely true, with the US, France, and the UK having much lower levels of this than Spain, Italy, and South Korea. And so then my question could be, is that cultural distance also true in the other countries here, like Greece and Portugal? Yes, it is. Okay, what about the other countries on the other side? Germany and Denmark? Yeah, definitely way lower respect for elders. And if I actually think about where countries have seen fertility collapse hit the hardest, like Japan, Korea, China, these are all countries that have a unique respect for elders. Where has fertility hit uniquely lowly? Greater Appalachian cultural region, as we've mentioned, which has almost no respect for elders at all. Like, elders are kept alive, but like you definitely
We won't kill you, but
we won't kill you, but it's
we'll
on the
resent you
table.
a little bit.
And Jewish culture. And I actually argue Jewish culture does not have a particularly high respect for elders when contrasted with, let's say, Korean or Japanese or Confucius culture. You have like a little degree, but I don't. I'd say less than Christian, even like your modern like East Coast Christian. Elders are just not assigned a high status unless they can meritocratically prove that they deserve a high status. So it's not that you don't see elders in positions of status. It's just that being elder in and of itself is not a thing deserving of respect. And
Okay.
so the question could be, why would that cause? Well, let's go into it a bit more before we ask why.
Yeah.
South Korea, Spain, and Italy appear to have a cultural similarity in that they have a deep respect for their elders rooted in traditions like Confucianism in South Korea and Catholicism in Spain and Italy. This respect manifests in behaviors such as using formal language, giving up seats for elders, and prioritizing family roles, which contrasts with the more individualistic and youth-focused culture that the US and the UK and France. However, it shows it shows a blend of this. Okay. Here it also divides stuff with looking at individualism versus collectivism, with the cultures on this side being much more individualistic, which I also see, and much more low power difference, which I also see. So that's another thing that could be causing this. Greece, Italy, Japan, Korea, Portugal, Spain, all are less individualistic, more collectivistic, and have higher power differences. Whereas the US, UK, Sweden, Germany, France, and Denmark all have fairly low power differences. So let's think about how this could have caused a fertility issue, right?
Okay. Yes.
The respect for elders is, I guess it's fairly obvious to me. Like, when resources are limited and demographic collapse is already underway, do
Yeah.
you distribute the resources that are left? If you could choose more babies or elders, you're going to choose elders.
Yeah.
I mean, a country like Korea should be spending as much on family creation as it spends on elder care if it wants to survive.
100%. Yeah.
And I'm fairly sure it's not, I'll add in post, but I'm fairly sure it's not even like, maybe 1/10 what it's spending on elder care. Okay, I find myself surprised on this one. They only spend about double on elderly costs. And elderly costs in South Korea, it's around 51 to 54 billion USD. And in children, it's around 18 to 22 billion USD per year as of 2025. So the elderly care ratio is 2 to 2.5x birth incentives.
Yeah.
If you look at so that makes perfect sense to me because it's about or me as an individual. Like if one of my parents was like, "Oh, I'm ailing, come help me. I can't survive on Social Security," I'd send a message to like,
disabled.
"I have 4 kids, you knob. F off."
Yeah, like your problem.
Your problem.
Hey, man, I got 5 kids to feed.
I'd be like that scene from Team America where he's like, if you get caught, you may need to take your own life. And he slides the hammer across the table.
Well, you'll probably want to take your own life. Here, you'd better have this. All right, team, that's it. We've got a job to do.
That'd be me. I'd be like, you know
what to do.
You know what to do. Okay. So that I see. Now let's talk about individualism. Why would high individualism lead to higher fertility rates in these cultures? The answer here could be that you have an easier time resisting the monoculture and dominant cultural practices within your country. And so you're going to have more people who sort of buck the trend, which I could definitely see leading to higher fertility rates in many of these countries.
Yeah.
You were going to say something?
No. I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, and then high power distance, that makes a lot of sense. I think in the modern world, high power distance just doesn't really work that well anymore. This is where like your boss is like really high above you in status. And this is actually really true in a lot of Latin America, where we're also seeing a unique fertility collapse. It's sort of across Catholic cultures because you have like the people who matter and then the people who are the people, right? And why this leads to fertility collapse is I think the people like don't see a point in continuing the cycle anymore.
Yeah.
They don't want to put people into this system where they're going to be an underclass. And yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. Why would you continue to participate in that? The final sort of hypothesis I'd have here about what would lead to this is just a longer time to evolve a resistance to the urban monoculture. I think the urban monoculture didn't really care, or the iterations of it that existed before it, like the prodromal iterations of it, didn't really focus on these other countries when they were super poor and culturally different. And I think
Mm,
that's what's leading to their high fertility rates at that period.
mhm.
And so they didn't have a century for the people who are slightly lower fertility rate when exposed to the urban monoculture to die out disproportionately.
Yeah.
And so now they're all dying out at once.
Mm. Yeah. 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 I could see that. It's so dire. That is interesting. I don't know. I'm still finding myself, however, gravitating toward the misogyny thing, just because so much of this problem is couples just failing to get married.
True. And a misogynistic attitude pervading a culture where women have an option not to marry is going to lead to women not is enthusiastically engaging with the marriage culture. And a
Plus,
lot of
every
it
high fertility family we know personally
Mhm.
has husbands who contribute a lot, are extremely supportive. If they are the breadwinners, they also contribute a lot of labor. If they are not the sole breadwinners, they contribute probably as much labor as their wife, also breadwinners,
Mhm.
contribute. You know, there's just like this.
Actually, I might word it differently. I'd say every high fertility family that we know has a husband who would be considered a simp by like the manosphere or the Andrew Tate movement. And not necessarily like for example, us. I'm not like a simp in a traditional term, but people have been like, "Oh, Malcolm, you're like overly nice to your wife. You overly pedestalize your wife. You."
Hmm.
And I'm probably of all of the high fertility men that we know, the most traditionally masculine. Except for
Yeah.
maybe Kevin Dolan.
Yeah.
Kevin Dolan's pretty traditionally masculine. But yeah, yeah, I think that you're 100% right here. Women have kids when they feel supported and protected,
Hmm.
because a woman in a modern context is just not going to feel like you have her back if you're pulling this. And the truth is you don't. I think we saw this was a Quiverfull movement, and it's part of the reason the Quiverfull movement sort of fell apart, was
Yeah.
a misunderstanding of the man's role in the household. Instead of adapting to modern and changing pressures, they tried to go as this dictatorial, male in control, woman at home does nothing birthing, and it didn't create an environment that daughters wanted to recreate or that sons were capable of recreating.
Yeah. I agree.
And actually here, I thought I read something really interesting on our Discord that somebody posted about the failure of the Quiverful movement to replicate itself.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh my God, this is so true. I've got to read it. So this is from the person on the Discord called Cata Catpulpa? Cat I don't know. It's some sort of vegetation. And,
Okay.
and they have 3 kids, because people say that on the Discord, how many kids they have. I have so many thoughts regarding this topic as somebody who is raised Quiverful adjacent, Christian homeschooler who attended Quiverful co-ops, etc. But my family wasn't specifically Quiverful ourselves. I think the big factor of their failure is the way that they specifically and intentionally raised non-agentic children. Boys in
Mm.
general had a bit of a rudderless time over the past few decades, but I've never seen anything like the slow motion catastrophe that has been the Quiverful boys aging out of their homeschooling regime. The
Hmm.
prototypical Quiverful family is a first generation of fairly beta white collar husband, fairly crazy homeschooling mother, raising sons who are simultaneously longhouse browbeaten under mommy's supervision his entire life, while also being inculcated with an irrational entitlement complex based on being male, not being accomplished. They can't follow in their haired, checked out father's white collar footsteps because they are undereducated colleges of this world.
Yeah.
But they often don't have the connections or savvy to make it in the working class trades world. So they either languish in some sort of drifting failure to launch, or if their family is particularly committed, get married off and are expected to support a family that increases by 1 every year, starting at the age of 18, on nothing but thoughts and prayers. It's such a
Mm.
mess. Anecdotally, I can confirm mass deconversion rates. I don't think the Duggars are at all archetypical. They mostly compensate for the above issue by having all that TLC money that Jim Bob bought real estate with. So he basically supports his sons through the dad welfare.
Hmm.
It's just crazy to me that they had all this IBLP propaganda about how they were going to raise a Joshua generation that's going to take over the government and lead a worldwide revival, and then raise the least agentic children ever walk the earth. Timid, sullenly.
Not good. Not
Or,
good.
the complete and utter failure and refutation of the movement's philosophy.
Yeah.
And yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think that that might be what we're seeing in these cultures that have these stricter power differences between the old and the young as well,
Yeah.
is that but they put really strict rules on their kids. And if you look at our family, while we have rules for our kids, I expect them and will be proud of them when they break those rules. That's part of why we use corporal punishment instead of limiting punishment to just like yelling or emotional escalation.
Yeah.
Because when a kid does something bad, it allows me to quickly show them, like, Bop, they did something wrong, but I still love you, like was recorded in that piece, so that they understand that breaking rules does not remove them from the circle of love of this family, and that I will set down a fence and rules for them, but I still, especially when they're breaking rules in their own, based on their own internal moral compass, have respect for them in doing that. And you see this, I've mentioned in previous episodes, like Jordan Peterson, A Guide to Raising Simps. And Jordan Peterson is like, you just need to break the child's will down until they listen to you. And I'm like, that is not a good idea. That raises non-agentic children. You want to build the child's will up until they take from nobody. And if they don't understand why you're giving rules and you're just like, you just obey the authority, then they're just going to obey the urban monoculture. And I think a lot of these religious families, that's what they were, just obey the authority, just obey the authority, just obey the authority. But they thought the authority was always going to be the church. And they didn't realize that the authority changes based on the person's context if they're interacting within the real world. And so they were easily browbeaten. And they also created males that, like, who would want that? Like, a lot of girls just aren't going to want that.
Yeah.
And so they get assist, because if it's like much worse than like a Mormon community or something, where you have more of the church like keeping track of things and less a chance that one man is going to be like overly domineering with his family or something. Within these more dispersed Protestant communities, I, as a woman, honestly, I wouldn't want to marry into one of these. I'd be really worried, especially if they were raised with a sort of like, well, men lead the family attitude. Like, and we have me as a man lead the family. I just consider that a gift from Simone.
Well, and back to our repeated theme of real dominance. Real dominance isn't shut up and do what I say, follow my orders. Real dominance is demonstrating through your competence, good decision making, and good leadership, natural leadership, that your plans are trustworthy and the best way to go. People fall in line. There is no ordering, and there is no shutting people down and systematically training them to be compliant. You don't need to train people to be compliant when they know you're right. And that's the big difference.
Yeah, well, and we had the episode on Andrew Tate where I was like, Andrew Tate's idea of masculinity, it's like he watched The Gladiator and he's like, the emperor, that's what the ideal man is like. And that the gladiator Maximus, he's a simp. Whereas the exact opposite is true, and I pointed this out because if you watch he attempts to force the women around him to follow his wills, literally at sword point, like Andrew Tate being like, this is why I have a sword, so women don't, they talk down to me. And you see the emperor playing with like a sword in his house, and wanting to be loved. And I think that if you look at Maximus, none of this is about being loved by people or anything like that. He just has a duty and he's carrying it out. And it's certainly not about, like, if you look at the character of Maximus, you look at the relationship he's framed as having with both his kids and the woman who has that desperate crush on him, is this is not a guy who is pushing around his wife, telling his wife, like, get in the kitchen, telling his wife, like, you do what I say. Now, the wife is making him dinner because she cares about him, right? And they're working on a shared goal or something like that. Like, you don't have any feeling like they don't have traditional gender roles, but the traditional gender roles are carried out because those are the preferences of the male and the woman. They are not carried out because the woman has some supernatural reason to be obedient or some like biological mandate to be obedient to her husband. It's just average biological differences here.
Yeah. Yeah. Which means that there also is no commitment to those specific roles. And the commitment is to where someone's propensity and skill lies. So if, for example, a man and a woman or whatever configuration of people you want were to pair up and start raising kids together, we're not going to be like, well, you're the woman, so of course you're doing those things. It's, well, okay, what are you going to contribute best do that thing. So if a man ends up doing all of the cooking, indoor cleaning, and infant rearing, fine. We're not married to that. And I think a lot of these really conservative religions are, and these cultures as well. Like, well, no, the man can't do that, even if he'd rather do that. Like, even if the woman has the highest educational degree and the greatest earning potential, the greatest professional network, she has to become the mother who stays at home. And somehow the less educated, less connected, less privileged man has to earn enough for both.
So this isn't just like a religious culture thing. This is also within the wider online manosphere, right-leaning culture, where recently there was a fight of memes in which there was this concept of like the dad meme or the husband meme. And it's typically the husband being like, oh, honey, of course I'll do X for you, or I'll do Y for you. You know, he's doing something sweet for the wife. It's like normal for a husband to do.
Yeah.
This was known as the wife jack meme wars. I was wrong. It wasn't about a husband meme. It was a wife meme. And then a bunch of guys were like, oh, like you guys posting what a simp you are, you know, and the guys, of course, complaining that these other guys are simps are unmarried, right? And it's like, well, that's genetically what's being preserved in the human condition. It's not a simp. It's being able to work with people,
right,
and being able to appreciate what other people are bringing to the table. And it has become almost within these cultures seen as a sign of submission or browbeatenness if you are shown as making either concessions to your wife, or you are shown as having appreciation for your wife. And yet anybody who is going to have a lot of kids knows that those two things are, like, within a modern context, critical to, I think, having, let's say, over 5 kids. Like, you just can't get to these sorts of numbers if you're not doing that. If you're taking the you do what I say approach, you're going to really struggle to get that high, because the woman is just not going to be all about it. She's going to be like, what am I doing all this for? Like, what am I raising my daughters for? Like, what's the point, right?
Yeah, it's demotivating.
Well, yeah, slave mentality. If you want to turn your wife into a slave, she's going to labor like a slave.
Well, again, intrinsic motivation is just a billion times more powerful than extrinsic motivation, as is seen across countless studies, research, anecdotal examples. This should be common sense.
Their wives following them for the same reason in Gladiator why people followed what the emperor said instead of the reason why people followed what Maximus said. And it's a completely different. Are they following you because you're inspiring them, or are they following you because it's the rules and because you'll hurt them if they don't? And I think that this sort of like ideal of male aesthetics that's not really working for any man anywhere that I'm aware of, except for maybe Andrew Tate, is like super toxic. And with Andrew Tate, it basically only works because he's super wealthy. Like, women will do a lot of crazy nonsense for very wealthy men.
Yeah, it's a trade-off.
Especially if they have like a public profile or something like that. Like, you look at the simp women that like Elon gets or something like that. But I could not treat you the way that Elon treats his wives. Like, I would never get away with that. Like, you'd leave me. And I don't think that, like, and somebody's like, is that fair? It's like, dude, he's like a infinity billionaire. Like, fair is not part of the equation. It's a different social contract when you're interacting with somebody like that. It's like, oh, the king in like, you know, medieval Europe or something like that treats their wives differently than you do. It's like a entirely different social contract exists for the king. Of course. Like, what are you? Like, how could you think that? And I think that you get sort of 2 categories of influencers who like go into this category of influence. One is they're super successful, they become super wealthy, and they're able to live some sort of like unrealistic life.
Yeah.
The other, they go like the Nick Fuentes path, and they end up like a forever celibate, right? You know, where they can't, like, his advice on the way you should treat girls leads to the extinction of your culture. Like, he is living proof of that.
Yeah.
He's not going to have any kids, likely at this point, given how old he is already, or at least not many, not unless he uses IVF, which he won't. And so
my problem is, I mean, men really can afford to delay fertility, but they're either ensuring that their children are not going to be very healthy, or they need to freeze their sperm. Guys, please freeze your sperm for the love. Like, although here's my other problem with like
genetic health, it degrades at around the same rate as female genetic health does. It just doesn't fall off a cliff.
And these higher risk factors that your child will get if you have them with older sperm, like higher risks of cancer and all sorts of other disorders, they get passed on to your grandchildren and their grandchildren. So what are you doing? But beyond that, like, so, I mean, one, it is actually super possible if you freeze sperm to have healthy children late in life and, you know, put that off. My problem is that older men are still in a bad situation if they choose to do that, because either you end up with, you know, your perfect, sexy 20 something wife who is never going to be on your level because there's so much of an age gap. You know, you're never really going to have an intellectual equal. I mean, you might need someone who loves old souls, but still, like, age, you know, it doesn't quite work as neatly as I would hope on that front. And
Yeah.
then,
Well, and
or
you know, these
you end
men
up
are
with an older woman who probably hasn't frozen her eggs, and then you have the same problem with genetic material.
well, and these men are going to be doing like you. Okay, let me put it this way. You, a guy right now, you're like, yeah, when I'm 50 or 60, I'm going to get a young woman and I'm going to have lots of kids after I'm rich.
Yeah, do
And
you
I'm like,
want a child? Do you
no,
want to raise a child and then have her raise child? Like,
no, not just that, but like, do you even want to be having that sex? Like, no, I'm being honest. Like, do you really want like a 50-year-old sleeping with like a late 20 something? Like,
it's
do you
gross.
think that's hot for the 50-year-old even at that point? Like, where you're taking all of the medication so that you're still horny
Oh, don't
and
do
you're taking all
oh.
of the
Ugh.
pills so that you can still get hard. Like, that's
Well,
not
and then there's also
hot.
the problem, like, the most, and this is not spoken about enough. The most unsexy type of sex is obligatory sex,
Ugh.
especially if you know that the partner is like having sex out of obligation. And they may be great at acting, but I'm pretty sure that the vast majority of 20 something girls who marry wealthy and successful, much older men are faking it,
Yeah,
which
so
is
you're
the
having
worst
sex
type of,
with some woman who's pretending to be into you. Like,
which is the worst type of sex. I just like, I could never have sex with someone like that. Just like that.
I'm just saying that like they think that what they're getting is just delaying and then they get the young hot wife and it's like no, you get the young hot wife when you're young and hot or you get some other type of weird relationship.
Mhm,
Not like you create that relationship later in life.
mhm. Yeah.
So I think that that's going to be a possibility for them. But the reality is it's not either from a genetic standpoint that real of a possibility or from a, you know, they're not like, oh, I can delay getting this now and I'll get it in the future. No, you're not getting it in the future. You're getting some
Mm-mm.
weird other thing, which is not as fun. You know,
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
Love you to death, Simone. I am glad that I settled down with you. I had another one that I'm not actually not going to make because I just know it'll do bad, but it was really interesting to research, which was if the trope of the bachelor party where people felt like they were like marrying a ball and chain and like
Oh
what
yeah, like this is my last moment to go wild.
yeah, I was like, is this real? Like, was this ever actually a thing that was practiced in large numbers? Because it like doesn't seem
Well, I thought it was a condensed version of the sort of Catholic model that existed back all the way to like ancient Roman times, where it was just kind of understood that debaucherous wealthy men would have all the female partners they wanted and then try to sober up later in life when they got married, and that a bachelor party is kind of compressing that for less wealthy people. What did you find in your research?
well, yeah, I mean, apparently it did really happen, and it you know, they were like, "Well, I understand that today," because I was like, "It doesn't even make logical sense. Like, you're about to get married to presumably the person that you love more than anyone in the world, and you've been so excited to spend your life with.
Hmm.
Like, why would you go out and sleep with other people right before that? Like, why would you want that?" And it was like, "Oh, well, you see, people didn't actually used to love their wives during this period of
Yeah,
history."
I mean, the alternate take there is, hold on, actually, maybe this was the sign of a better world in which people got married as business arrangements and saw sex as something that they did
No,
separately, but
what it
also lived in
is
monogamous societies.
a breaking of both, which is to
Mm.
say that it was this period of the boomers where they got all of the divorces, you know, they had like the really high divorce rate and that had terrible marriages. Like everybody knows, like the boomers were almost like the pure infantilization of humanity, where they were a generation that had very little self-control, very little like it is obsessed with self-validation, just, broke a lot of social traditions that were actually really important without understanding what they were doing, didn't really pass money down to their kids intentionally, didn't really establish the idea of like intergenerational family units well in the way that their ancestors had.
Mm.
They just sort of, after the greatest generation, it just like increasingly degraded. And then you got to the boomers. And I think since the boomers, every generation has been sort of building themselves a little bit back from that point. You look at Gen Alpha, and they're definitely a lot more mature than the
Yeah.
boomers in terms
Yeah.
of the way they relate to things like sex and sexuality and parties and wives and everything like that. And I think that the boomers were this generation where they got married out of obligation because it was sort of like what they did. They were like a generation that wanted to live this white picket fence ideal, or they had like an ideal of what they wanted to live without thinking about why these things were ideals, without thinking about why you had kids, or without thinking about everything was just about like hedonism and consumerism for them. Very much what I think, something like Fight Club was arguing against was the mindset of the boomer generation. And then you have other generations trying to reestablish some sort of stable state norm after the boomers.
Huh. Well, that's interesting. It's an interesting idea. Okay.
I mean, they're the generation that had all of our societies just take out debt forever instead of actually trying to build like stable civilizations. They're the generation that reads the most whenever we bring up fertility collapse. They're the generation that's out. If you look at these Trump protests, everyone is like, it's wild that they're all like elderly white people. Those are the only people protesting.
So weird. So weird.
But they still get their news from the news, like CNN and stuff. And so they think that like, oh, dude, the evil Trump is out it again. Anyway.
Well, and I guess it's very boomer to think that protests actually work. Because I don't know. I guess I should look at
go to a protest one day and film and just be like, protests don't work. Nobody cares about what you're doing here.
No.
You have wasted a day. Do you have nothing better to do with your lives?
One of the things that we really can't stand is listening to people who have really bad brain rot. And the kinds of people who attend protests are, I would argue, the epitome of that type of person. Remember at NatalCon, there were those protesters outside the opening night, and Kiara, the journalist from Mother Jones, so
tried to talk to them.
Sufficiently progressive, right? Didn't look conservative.
No.
Came up to them, approached them as a Mother Jones journalist, and attempted to talk with them. And when I saw her after her attempted interaction, she's like, well, I couldn't get a word in edgewise. Like, she attempted to interview them, and they were so brain rotted that she literally couldn't ask them a question to get their opinion on the matter they were protesting.
Well, it's funny you say that. There's been a lot of videos that have been going viral of people going to these Trump protests and trying to talk to people.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't know why they're there, and they don't know why Trump is a fascist. They're like, Trump's a fascist. They go, explain. Like, what has he done that makes him a fascist? And what the right is taking away from this is, oh, these must be paid protesters who don't actually have a vested interest in this. I don't think that's it. I think they're just brainless, brain-rotted automatons who are like, CNN says Trump is bad. No, I go to field and yell at people. I genuinely think more people are like closer to like NPC automatons than you would imagine.
Maybe they're just all in the same Facebook groups. I imagine this is a Facebook groups thing. If it's mostly boomers, it's just
oh no.
Anyway, come on, that makes sense, right?
It does. It does. It's tonight
for dinner. Hot dogs.
Yeah, and I'm gonna do we got them in all these with
fancy
all these buns.
These amazing. Oh yeah, they're brioche buns. We really went all out for that.
You're gonna toast the buns, of course.
With butter, obviously.
Yeah. We are going to, though, save my curry for another night. I can have it tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I'll do hot dogs tonight.
Lunch tomorrow. Hot dog night. Very American. Big deviation from your typical meal choice. But everyone seems to want hot dogs right now, so.
Well, the kids wanted hot dogs, and I was like, you know what? We've got the onions. Now we've got relish. We've got.
Do you want them in confetti or slices? Thin slices.
Oh, onions and hot dogs you typically want in slices to get more crunch.
Not, although I guess I've seen it both ways. Or I think of relish and I think of the
No,
confetti.
either way works, honestly. The confetti works just as well because you get crunch from it too. So, you
Yeah,
know, do
actually,
what
I'm
you
thinking
want.
confetti's better because you can really finely chop it, and you don't want to have like where you're like peeling off noodles. You know what I mean?
So you guys in the comments need to answer this. Hot dog onions, is it confettis or is it noodles? Confetti or noodles for hot dog onions?
Asking the hard questions. I'm more interested if people have alternate theories between the group 1 and group 2 countries. If it's that feminism didn't catch up as quickly with economic development, which then led to a faster backlash and separation between the sexes, or if Grok's theory was more accurate, or if it's something else that you think is going on, because I find that quite interesting. I had previously thought that leapfrogging development, like really fast development, was a good thing because you ended up getting like building infrastructure when tech was already more advanced. So you ended up with much better systems than, say, the United States had, because you were developing using, you know, third to fourth generation later technology and all these other things. And so this is making me look differently at the benefits of developing quickly and later. But yeah, I'm curious to hear people's theories on that.
All right, Simone, I love you to death and have a
Yes, dear.
spectacular day.
Goodbye, my dear husband. And I will give you a call on your phone when dinner's ready. So please,
I'll have it on.
thank you.
You want me to open it for you?
Wow!
Wow, you can read it. I got a purple card. Can I make you read it to me?
Sure, it says... That is so cool. Look at that, Toasty. Do you want to put it on the fridge?
Yeah.
Okay.